Lights, camera, innovation. Walt Disney Studios chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to transform the movie-making process. Together, we kept a remote production hub in Hawaii and sync with a team in California to bring Lilo and Stitch to theaters this summer. This is picture-perfect collaboration. This is Walt Disney Studios with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
What's worse than an ad interrupting your favorite music or podcast? That uninspired coffee you've been drinking while working, which is why Flavia is elevating your everyday coffee experience. Now you can enjoy cafe-quality beverages like coffee, tea, frothy lattes, and creamy hot chocolate made right in your home office, actual office, or wherever you want to upgrade your mug with bold, delicious flavors. Visit Flavia.com to shop the collection of machines and beverages now.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Excuse me,
Oh,
Laurie.
Mr. Brackett, I'm sorry, Mr. Brackett.
Oh, I didn't mean to startle you.
That's all right.
You know, it's Halloween. I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to One Good Scare, the show where we explore our favorite horror movies. I'm your host, Will, and today we're jumping right back into the iconic slasher flick, Halloween. In the first episode, we left off at the end of Act 1, which I'll recap in just a few minutes. And in this episode, we'll be diving into Acts 2 and 3, and along the way, we'll consider the impact and legacy of Halloween on the horror genre, including your comments on why you love this movie so much. Before we do that, let me remind you to follow One Good Scare on Instagram at OneScarePod and on TikTok at OneGoodScarePod. I'm active on both, love discussion, and will respond to your comments. Also, be sure to leave a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Pods. It lets me know you're enjoying the show, and that goes a long way into keeping it going. And remember, the goal of One Good Scare isn't to replace your viewing experience. It's to enhance it. So if you haven't seen Halloween, or if it's been a while, my strong encouragement is to watch it first and then come back and give the show a listen. Of course, if you'd rather listen than watch, just keep in mind, One Good Scare is essentially a gigantic spoiler. That said, let's start with a recap of Halloween Act 1. We've got a lot to cover. In Episode 1, we explored the opening act of Halloween, which spent about 35 minutes or so building tension and dread, and introducing us to the main characters. In the opening scene, we discover a young woman is brutally stabbed to death on Halloween Day, 1963, in Haddonfield, Illinois, by an unknown assailant, which we quickly find out is a 6-year-old boy named Michael. Fast forward 15 years, and during a dark and stormy night, a patient escapes from the Illinois State Psychiatric Hospital after assaulting a nurse and stealing her car. We're introduced to Dr. Sam Loomis, the patient psychiatrist, who's convinced he's headed to Haddonfield, though we're not quite sure why. The scene cuts to Haddonfield on October 31st, 1978, the 15-year anniversary of the brutal killing. We're introduced to a young woman, Laurie Strode, and an elementary-aged boy, Tommy Doyle. The two chit-chat about their plans for the evening as Laurie goes to put a key under the doormat of the infamous Myers house, the site of the brutal murder in 1963. Tommy flips out and says bad things happened there and that it's haunted. In this scene, we get our first glimpse of the escaped patient, though it's only over his shoulder as he stalks Lori while she walks down the street. That same day, Dr. Loomis pleads for someone, anyone, to take him seriously. He believes the patient is headed to Haddonfield, and it's going to be a bloodbath. He faces resistance. After all, how could the patient have driven 150 miles from Smith's Grove to Haddonfield? Someone must have taught him to drive. A quick spoiler alert. I learned a theory about this from a friend, Alfonso, and it's directly connected to the unrated producer's cut of Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. After this, we're taken to a high school classroom, where Lori is alternating between daydreaming and paying attention to a too-good-to-be coincidence lecture on fate and destiny. And as she looks out the window, not once but twice, she sees a strange figure in a white mask staring at her from behind a brown station wagon. It's the same car that was stolen the night before from Smith's Grove. A quick cutscene shows Tommy Doyle being bullied by a few of his peers, who taunt and torture him about the boogeyman. Apparently, he's coming to get him that night. Tommy manages to get away, but not before being tripped and crushing a huge pumpkin. As one of the bullies runs off, he's stopped by the escaped patient, who then follows Tommy quietly before driving off. Now convinced the patient is definitely heading to Haddonfield, Dr. Loomis gets on the road and stops at an intersection to make a quick phone call. He's trying to warn everyone about the incoming nightmare. After hanging up, he sees a truck pulled off the side of the road, and after inspecting, he discovers the white hospital gown and a matchbook that was in the station wagon the night before. Now he's positive the patient is on his way to Haddonfield. The next scene introduces us to Lori's friends, Linda and Annie, as the three walk home from school. They watch as a brown station wagon pulls around the corner and speeds past them. Annie antagonizes the driver, calling him a jerk, and the driver stops for a few seconds before pulling away slowly. The three keep walking, when suddenly Lori sees the figure in the white mask standing behind a bush, but when Annie goes to check, he's gone. Annie walks to her house, and Lori bumps into Sheriff Brackett, whose classic line is the inspiration for this show. After heading upstairs, Lori looks out her back window and is horrified to see the figure in the white mask standing in her backyard, staring up at her. As she watches him, he disappears, and she initially panics, before receiving a phone call and making plans with Annie, who picks her up a bit later and hands Lori a joint. A quick comment. This scene is fascinating because Lori never takes her eyes off the figure standing in her yard. But he disappears in plain sight, literally there 1 second and gone the next. Don't believe me? Watch it again. A quick scene shows Dr. Loomis and another man looking for a grave in a cemetery, Judith Myers, who apparently was the young woman killed by the young boy on Halloween night 15 years before. The headstone is missing, but we're given a key piece of information. The boy's name is Michael Myers, and the victim, Judith Myers, was his older sister. At this point, Dr. Loomis says to no one and everyone, he came home. The scene cuts back to Lori and Annie, who are getting high in her car. Suddenly, the brown station wagon pulls up behind them. Annie panics when she realizes her dad, Sheriff Brackett, is up ahead, and the two do their best to get rid of the smell of the joint from a car whose windows were rolled all the way up. When they meet him, he tells them some kids, it's always the goddamn kids, stole knives, rope, and a mask. The two pull away, and as they do, Dr. Loomis walks up to Sheriff Brackett and tells him they need to speak immediately. At exactly the same time, the brown station wagon pulls up behind Dr. Loomis, whose back is fully turned, before driving off right past him. The brown station wagon pulls up behind Annie and Lori as they enter their neighborhood, and the scene shifts from dusk to dark, and we've arrived to the end of Act 1. Okay, now that we're done recapping, it's time to jump into Acts 2 and 3. So settle down, turn down the lights, and enjoy the masterpiece that is John Carpenter's Halloween. As Laurie and Annie pull into their neighborhood, we're given a first-person point of view from the inside of the brown station wagon. It's as if we're the passenger. The intro piano music plays as Michael Myers breathes heavily. Annie drops Laurie off at the Doyle's house and pulls into a driveway across the street. Michael parks the brown station wagon a bit further down and gets out of the car while kids trick-or-treat around the neighborhood. Unsettling music plays as Michael watches Annie from behind a tree as she talks with Lindsay Wallace's parents. Annie is babysitting. As the Wallaces walk to their car, Annie and Lindsay walk into the house and close the door behind them. The next scene takes us back to the Myers house, which is falling apart and scary looking in the darkened shadows. A sheriff's car pulls up to the curb, and Dr. Loomis and Sheriff Brackett step out and walk into the home. We find out it's been vacant since the murder in 1963, and the neighborhood kids think it's haunted. The two start to walk upstairs when they find a dog on the floor of the living room. Sheriff Brackett says, "It's still warm," and Dr. Loomis responds, "He got hungry." Initially, Sheriff Brackett pushes back by saying, "No man could do this," but Loomis tells him, "This isn't a man." The two walk upstairs, flashlights in hand, and step into the room where Michael murdered Judith. He retraces Michael's steps, when suddenly a broken gutter smashes the window Loomis was staring out of. In a panic, he pulls his gun, to the surprise of Sheriff Brackett. Loomis then gives one of the most important monologues in the movie. Quote, "I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding in even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face, and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil." End quote. Sheriff Brackett wants to notify everyone about Michael coming back to Haddonfield, but Loomis tells him to have his men stay quiet and remain on alert. Loomis stays back in the Myers house as Sheriff Brackett leaves. Okay, so let's talk about this scene for a minute. To this point, we've seen Dr. Loomis is prone to extensive monologues. It's part of his frantic, determined energy. He just wants to catch Michael before he can kill again. But of all the monologues, this one is the most important, because we find out that Michael's motivation is nothing more or less than being evil. He is the embodiment of evil, and he kills for its own sake. The scene then cuts to Laurie sitting with Tommy Doyle. She's reading him a story, but he becomes disinterested and wants her to read a few of his hidden comics. As Laurie reads off the names, Laser Man, Neutron Man, Tarantula Man, Tommy asks her, "Laurie, what's the boogeyman?" But before she can answer, the phone rings. It's Annie, who is making popcorn while babysitting across the street. The Wallace's dog comes into the kitchen and starts growling and barking while she's talking with Laurie. A quick cutscene shows Michael Myers standing outside the Wallace's house, looking in through a window. Annie calls Lindsay to get the dog out of the kitchen, but within a few seconds he eventually walks away quietly. Annie then tells Laurie that Ben Tramer was going to ask her to the homecoming dance the next day. As Laurie objects, Tommy gets up from the couch and walks into the dining room where he pulls the blinds up and looks out the window. Across the street, silhouetted against the white siding of the Wallace's house, is Michael Myers. He's standing there, staring. Tommy backs away slowly and runs to get Laurie. He tells her the boogeyman is outside. Laurie looks, but there's nobody there. Tommy looks again, but this time, the figure is gone. Okay, something interesting. When I posted a video of this scene on TikTok, quite a few folks commented, "That's Deborah Hill dressed as Michael Myers." I'd heard this over the years, but hadn't really looked into it. So after seeing a few of the comments, I set out to do some research. And it seems like it's largely an urban legend. It is true that Deborah Hill put on the costume and mask, and even took a few still shots as B-roll footage. But it's not true that those shots with her in costume made it into the final version of the film. In fact, a few articles I read shared how comical her being in the costume actually was, because she was significantly shorter than Nick Castle, and the costume was oversized. So unfortunately, while it makes for a good discussion, it's just not true that Deborah Hill is in this scene. There's something else. If you look at the scene closely, specifically at Michael's silhouette, we cannot tell if he's looking ahead at Tommy or back at Annie. Tommy assumes he's looking at him, and that's why he freaks out. But the scene before shows Michael looking at Annie, which would have put his back to Tommy. We then hear heavy breathing outside the kitchen of the Wallace's house. Annie is still on the phone with Lori and making popcorn. She spills popcorn oil on herself just as Michael walks up to the back door. Annie calls Lindsay to get her a robe, and she takes off the stained clothing. Michael watches from outside the kitchen door, breathing heavily, before pulling down a hanging plant. Annie hears the commotion, but continues working on treating the stain, while Michael moves back to the front of the house. As he's standing there, the family dog walks up beside him and starts barking. Annie calls Lindsay, but says never mind as she hears Lester whimpering. We then see that Michael has killed the family dog in the front yard. The scene cuts back to Lori and Tommy, who are sitting in the living room watching The Thing. Tommy asks about the jack-o'-lantern, to which Lori says, after the movie. He asks about the comic books, to which Lori says, after the jack-o'-lantern. Then he asks, what about the boogeyman? And Lori says, there's no such thing. Tommy objects, and Lori tries to rationalize it as being make-believe, even though Tommy is adamant that he saw the boogeyman a few moments before. Lori tries to comfort Tommy by telling him that she's with him and isn't going to let anything happen. Tommy makes her promise, and the two prep to carve the jack-o'-lantern. Okay, real quick, there's a pretty awesome Easter egg here in this scene. 3 years after Halloween released in 1981, John Carpenter would direct the horror classic The Thing, which is my favorite horror movie of all time. The scene cuts to Annie walking to the laundry room, which is detached from the main house. The power is out, and as she walks towards the back of the laundry room, the door closes. She looks over, and seeing no one, searches for detergent. Sharp music plays, and we see Michael is standing outside the laundry room door, looking in at Annie, who is holding a box of Tide. She looks back and assumes it's Paul, her boyfriend, but seeing no one, she starts the laundry. Suddenly, the laundry room door slams shut, locking her in. She bangs on the door and yells for Lindsay, who can't hear her because she has the volume turned up on the television. The phone rings, and Annie knows it's Paul. Annie walks over to a side window and attempts to open it. Okay, there's something really interesting here. This scene is shot with a wide view. Annie is on the right side of the screen trying to open a window, and on the right side is a doorway to another room. It's pitch black, and this is another scene where John Carpenter subverts our expectations, because it makes perfect sense for Michael to pop out of that dark room and attack Annie. Except he doesn't. Annie manages to open a window, and a quick cutscene takes us back to the living room, where Lindsay takes a phone call from Paul. Lindsay hangs up and heads out to the laundry room to let Annie know Paul called. She hears Annie yelling from inside the laundry room and runs over. Annie is stuck in the window, and Lindsay helps get her out. The two walk back to the main house as the telephone rings. Lindsay picks up the phone and tells Paul that Annie got stuck in the window. Annie then takes the phone from Lindsay, and the two have a conversation about their evening plans. The camera pans back and forth as Annie talks, and we catch a quick glimpse of Michael Myers standing outside the kitchen, behind partially opened French doors. But then, like before, one second he's there, the next he's gone. Annie and Paul flirt, and she agrees to pick him up from his house. Annie moves back into the living room to talk with Lindsay, who doesn't want to go with Annie to pick up Paul. Annie finally convinces her by saying she can watch television with Tommy Doyle. The two leave the Wallace's house and head across the street to the Doyles, and as they get to the front lawn, Michael pops up and watches as they knock on the front door. Lindsay and Tommy sit down to watch a movie, while Lori teases Annie about her outfit. Lori tells Annie to cancel with Ben Tramer and heads out to pick up Paul. Lori initially objects, but Annie tells her that if she watches Lindsay, she'll talk to Ben Tramer in the morning. Lori agrees. Annie heads out and walks back to the Wallace's house, where her car is pulled around the side. The doors are locked, and she walks back inside to get her keys, whistling along the way. She stops to look in a mirror and brush her hair before heading back to the car, which is now unlocked, with all the windows fogged up. Annie stops whistling as soon as she realizes this, and as she touches the windshield, Michael pops up from the back seat and starts strangling her. As she struggles for air, she hits the horn a few times. Michael then stabs her, and we watch as the light fades from Annie's eyes, and she dies. So the camera work in this scene is terrific. We see the attack unfold from inside and outside the car, and perhaps for the first time, we really get a sense of the horrific quality of Michael Myers' mask. I'll talk more about the mask in just a bit.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
This episode is brought to you by Max. The HBO original comedy special, Gerard Carmichael, Don't Be Gay, is now streaming on Max. Emmy-winning comedian Gerard Carmichael returns to the stage in his boldest special yet, bringing his sharp wit, unfiltered honesty, and the kind of vulnerability that's made his voice truly one of a kind. Don't miss Gerard Carmichael, Don't Be Gay. Now streaming on Max.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Spotify.
The scene cuts back to Tommy and Lindsay, who are watching a movie. Tommy slips away and sneaks behind a curtain in the living room. He's trying to scare Lindsay by whispering her name in a creepy way. As Lindsay gets up to find him, Tommy peeks out the window and sees Michael Myers carrying Annie's lifeless body into the Wallace's house before closing the door behind him. Real quick, when I posted a video of this scene on TikTok, so many people chimed in saying this was the scariest scene in the entire movie. To this point, Michael has been operating mostly in the shadows, but this is really the first time we see him in plain view. Tommy freaks out after bumping into Lindsay. He's screaming the boogeyman is outside, scaring Lindsay and drawing a reaction from Laurie. Tommy says, "Nobody believes me," and Lindsay responds, "I believe you, Tommy." The two go back to watching their movie. The scene cuts back to the Myers house, where Dr. Loomis is waiting along the bushes. As he stands there, a few kids walk up to the house and dare a kid named Ronnie to walk up to the front door. Loomis, from behind the bushes, whispers for Ronnie to get his ass away from there. The kids run off, and Loomis smiles. Just then, Sheriff Brackett comes up behind him and tells him there's nothing going on, and that he feels Loomis is way off. Loomis objects and tells him that Michael has been waiting for this night for 15 years. He says, quote, "Death has come to your little town, Sheriff. You can either ignore it or help me stop it." End quote. Sheriff Brackett responds and says, "Do you know what Haddonfield is? Families, children, all lined up in rows up and down these streets. You're telling me they're lined up for a slaughterhouse?" Sheriff Brackett agrees to stay with Loomis before walking off. Alright, so this quick 3-minute scene is super important because it's the premise of the entire movie. A crazed murderer has come to small-town America. It's a place where families and children are all lined up in rows up and down the streets for the sole purpose of a bloodbath. And remember what made Halloween so revolutionary and so scary. For the first time, the killer wasn't out there. He was right here. The next scene cuts to a van pulling up along a curb. It's Linda and Bob talking about their plans for the evening. Bob can barely contain himself as he says maybe the worst line in movie history. Quote, "First I'll rip your clothes off. Then you rip my clothes off. Then we rip Lindsay's clothes off." End quote. Alright, Bob, listen. It's one thing to be a horny guy who's excited to get some action. It's another thing to be a horny guy who's making pedophilic statements. Whatever bad thing is going to happen to Bob, he deserves it. The two laugh and head into the Wallace's house, Linda holding a beer while Bob carries her through the threshold. They bust in the door to find the house dark and empty. Linda calls to Annie and turns on a light, but there's no one home. The two start kissing and lie down on a couch. Piano music plays in the background, and we hear heavy breathing as Michael watches them from the hallway. The scene cuts back to Laurie, who is bringing a carved and lit jack-o'-lantern to the dining room. She looks out the window and sees Bob's van parked across the street. She and the kids decide to finish the movies, but as she sits down, the phone rings. It's Linda, who is asking about Annie. Laurie tells Linda that Annie left Lindsay with her, and Linda realizes she and Bob have the house to themselves. They turn out the lights and head upstairs. The scene moves to the upstairs bedroom, where Bob and Linda are having sex. The phone rings, and Bob seems to be having some technical difficulties. When they decide to put the phone off the hook, the two go back to doing their business, while sharp piano music plays, and Michael's shadow moves past them. After a minute, Bob finishes and Linda lights up a cigarette. She sends him downstairs to get a beer. As he moves through the dark house, he finds the fridge and pulls out a few beer cans. And as he stands near the kitchen sink, he sees the back door opening. Thinking someone is playing a joke on him, he opens up a set of double doors on his left, but no one is there. Then, he opens the doors on his right, saying, "Come on out." As soon as he does, Michael Myers pushes through the doorway and chokes Bob, lifting him off the ground before plunging a huge carving knife into his chest. Bob goes limp, and we see the iconic shot of Michael staring at Bob, who was impaled by the knife into the double doors. Michael is moving his head back and forth, back and forth. It's as if he's admiring his work. So here's something interesting. I did a bit of research to find out what Michael's head movements meant, and it seems as though it's open to interpretation. There are some who think he's admiring his kill and is looking at it from multiple angles. There are others who believe he's standing there in amazement of what he's done. For what it's worth, Nick Castle, the actor who played Michael Myers in this scene, stated that Michael's head movements were intended to express childlike wonder at what he'd just accomplished. The scene moves back to the bedroom, where Linda is filing her nails. The door opens slowly, and she sees a figure standing in the doorway, dressed head to toe in a white sheet with eyes cut out and glasses on. She assumes it's Bob, and tries to entice him back into bed by lowering the covers. The figure just stands there, and Linda gets annoyed. She's had it and decides to call Laurie. Sharp piano music plays as Linda calls Laurie, and the scene alternates between the two. Just as Laurie picks up the phone, Michael begins strangling Linda with the telephone cord. Laurie assumes it's Annie and thinks she's having sex on the phone. Michael strangles Linda to death and picks up the phone, putting the receiver to his ear. And for the second time, we see a clear view of Michael's mask as he holds the phone up to his ear, with Laurie saying, "Annie," repeatedly. Okay, I mentioned a few times that I would talk about the iconic Michael Myers mask. Remember in episode 1, I mentioned how small the budget was? Well, with limited funds to spare, John Carpenter opted for a cheap $2 mask of William Shatner as Captain Kirk. Of course, they altered the mask to where it was unrecognizable. And that was the point. Carpenter wanted the mask to be barely human, for the viewer to understand Michael as barely human. So they opened the eye holes, texturized a few areas, and added a few details to create the mask that has been traumatizing people for nearly 50 years. After hanging up the phone, Laurie looks out the window at the Wallace's house and sees the downstairs lights turn on and then turn off. Ominous music plays in the background. Laurie tries calling Annie one more time, but the phone rings with no answer. She goes upstairs to check on Tommy and Lindsay, who are sound asleep after a night of movies, pumpkins, and worrying about the boogeyman. The scene shifts back to the Myers house, where Loomis is standing outside along the bushes. He turns to look down the street and sees the brown station wagon parked along the curb. Piano music plays as he walks up to it and sees the Illinois state seal on the driver's side door. Now he knows. Michael is not just in Haddonfield. He's somewhere in the neighborhood. And this is the end of Act 2. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about Act 2 before we jump into Act 3. Obviously, there's significantly more action in Act 2 than in Act 1. The pacing is much faster as things are starting to happen really, really fast. The constant criticism I hear about this movie is that it's too slow, but pacing is a significant part of any good horror movie. If you move too fast, the audience doesn't have a chance to catch all the details. But if you move too slow, the audience gets bored because nothing is happening. And in this movie, the pacing is everything. In a film where you're trying to subvert the expectations of your audience, you almost have to move a little bit slower than you typically would. You have to linger a second longer than normal. The camera needs to stick in one place for a bit longer than is comfortable. And in this movie, which may not be the case with other Halloween movies, Michael is stalking his victims before killing them. His movements, noises, breathing, and distractions are all intended to cause uncertainty and fear in the young women, and by extension, the audience. We've mentioned it before, but John Carpenter's use of score and music is terrific. It sets the entire pace of the film. When you hear any of the piano pieces start, you know some bad shit is gonna happen. And of course, the use of lighting and shadows makes these scenes far scarier than they should be. I mean, we've seen Michael stalking Laurie and her friends a few different times. But something about the dark cover of night makes him feel infinitely scarier. And the scene where he's silhouetted against the White House is just movie gold. Okay, let's move on to Act 3.
Every journey I take leaves a lasting impact. Traveling the world only makes me realize just how much more there is to explore.
No one builds a legacy by standing still. Start your journey at remova.com.
The scene moves back to the Doyle's house, where Laurie is walking downstairs. She grabs her keys from her bag and heads out the front door, looking across the street at the Wallace house. Tense music plays as Laurie walks slowly, the camera alternating between first person and third person. The front of the house is dark as Laurie walks up to the front door and rings the bell. She calls for Bob and Linda, but gets no answer. She walks around the side of the house and calls out for Annie, but gets no answer. She sees the back door open, the one where Michael had been spying on Annie. She walks into the kitchen while calling out for her friends. As she reaches the living room, she lunges in hopes of catching them by surprise. Except there's no one there. Suddenly, she hears a thump overhead and calls out to them, convinced they're pulling a Halloween prank. She moves towards the staircase as piano music plays ominously. The camera, once again, shifts between first person and third person as Laurie climbs the stairs. At the top, she notices a door with light pouring out of the sides and bottom. She opens it and is horrified to find Annie lying on the bed. She's dead, and above her is a headstone that reads Judith Myers. Laurie has a small panic attack and falls into the wall behind her, just next to an open doorway, likely to a closet. As she's standing there, Bob suddenly falls out of the door. He's been hung upside down and is swinging back and forth. Laurie screams and bumps into an armoire, which opens up to reveal Linda's dead body stuffed inside. Laurie is in full panic mode as she rushes out of the room and settles up against the side wall, a dark room directly next to her. As she stands there trying to get herself together, we see Michael creep in along the right side of the room, his white mask set against the darkness of the room itself. He stabs Laurie in the arm, and she falls over the railing and down the stairs, hurting her leg. Okay, real quick. The scene where Laurie is standing against the side wall and Michael creeps in slowly from the black background is just a beautiful shot and a masterclass in lighting. I posted a short video of this scene on TikTok, and over again, people commented, "This scene is just beautiful to watch." And they're not wrong. After Laurie lands at the bottom of the stairs, Michael quickly moves to the top of the stairs as intense piano music plays. And as Laurie tries to run away, he gives chase. Laurie manages to get back to the kitchen, where the back door had previously been open. It's now closed and held shut from the outside by a garden rake. As Laurie struggles with the lock, Michael begins punching through the kitchen door. Michael unlocks it as Laurie screams for help, and as he enters the kitchen, she smashes a window pane and escapes. Laurie is now in the neighborhood, screaming for help and moving from house to house. She bangs on a neighbor's door, and they turn on the light, look through the window, and turn off the light, leaving Laurie to fend for herself. She stumbles back to the Doyle's house and looks for her keys as she sees Michael walking towards her from the Wallace's house. Laurie throws a potted plant at the upstairs window, and Tommy wakes up as Michael gets closer and closer. Tommy opens the front door just in the nick of time as Michael reaches Laurie, and she rushes into the house and locks the door behind her. Laurie goes to the phone but finds it's been disconnected. And then, to her horror, she discovers a side window is open, and the opening is big enough for Michael to fit through. She hunkers down in front of the couch and grabs a sewing needle for protection, all while pleading for Michael to stop. Piano music plays as we hear heavy breathing. Suddenly, Michael pops up from behind the couch and tries to stab Laurie, the carving knife sticking in the couch cushion. Laurie then stabs Michael in the neck with the sewing needle. He stumbles backwards before collapsing to the floor. Laurie, now holding the knife, looks over the couch and sees Michael lying on the ground, face up. Laurie stares at the knife before tossing it to the ground. Okay, a quick side note. The carving knife that Michael uses in this scene is fucking gigantic. It looks like a goddamn sword, especially when Laurie's holding it. The scene shifts back to Loomis, who is walking the neighborhood. Sheriff Brackett pulls up and Loomis tells him he found the car. Sheriff Brackett drives off and Loomis continues his search. The scene shifts back to Laurie, who is walking upstairs to find Tommy and Lindsay, who are now hiding in a room. She hugs them, and they acknowledge the boogeyman is real. Laurie reassures them that she killed him. Tommy responds, "You can't kill the boogeyman," and the kids scream as they see Michael standing right behind them, carving knife in hand. I know we've said it at least 1,000 times, but the camera work and lighting in this scene are phenomenal. When Laurie is telling Tommy and Lindsay that she killed the boogeyman, we can actually see Michael's shadow over her shoulder as he comes up the stairs to get them. Michael reaches the stairs exactly as Tommy says, "You can't kill the boogeyman." And whether we realize it or not, "You can't kill the boogeyman" is the perfect summary for the entire Halloween franchise. Laurie immediately tells the kids to hide, and she rushes to a small bedroom closet. Michael scans the room and eventually comes to the closet, his silhouette casting terrifying shadows inside. He pulls at the doors, but finds them locked, all while Laurie is panicking in the corner of the closet. The shaking on the door stops for a split second, and then Michael starts punching the door wide open. He yanks the light on, and as he looks around, Laurie reaches up for a wire hanger, which she then pulls apart. When Michael reaches in to grab her, Laurie stabs him in the eye with the hanger. Michael drops the knife, and Laurie stabs him in the chest, causing him to fall to the ground. There's something super interesting here. First, this scene is a masterclass, like so many others, in camera work and lighting. It's claustrophobic and pressed in. The use of shadows, full illumination, and a strobe effect create a tense and scary scene as Michael breaks down the flimsy closet doors. We know he's going to get her. There's not a single inch of room for her to escape. Except Laurie is a badass, and she's super resourceful and fights to stay alive. Second, there were technically 5 individuals who played Michael Myers in this film. Will Sandin, who was 6-year-old Michael at the beginning. Deborah Hill, whose hands were passed off as young Michael's at the beginning of the film. Nick Castle, who played Michael for the majority of the movie. Tony Moran, who has an upcoming scene that we'll talk about in a minute. And Tommy Lee Wallace, who was Michael in the closet scene. The differences in style between Nick Castle and Tommy Lee Wallace are fascinating, because where Michael is calm and calculating for most of the movie, in the closet scene, he's frenzied, intense, and even animalistic.
Hey business owners, we know you know the importance of maximizing every dollar. With the Delta SkyMiles Reserve Business American Express card, you can make your expenses work just as hard as you. From afternoon coffee runs to stocking office supplies and even team dinners, you can earn miles on all your business expenses. Plus, you can earn 110,000 bonus miles for a limited time through July 16th. The Delta SkyMiles Reserve Business Card. If you travel, you know. Minimum spending requirements and terms apply. Offer ends 7/16/25.
After Laurie stabs him in the chest, Michael collapses to the ground and Laurie exits the closet slowly, walking around his body, before walking out of the room entirely. She knocks on the door and tells Tommy and Lindsay to run outside and get help. As they leave, she sits in the doorway of the bedroom, Michael's body on the ground behind her. Suddenly, he sits straight up without making a sound. The scene quickly cuts to the kids rushing out of the house screaming, with Loomis walking right near them. He realizes Michael is in the Doyle's house. As Laurie collects herself, piano music plays, and Michael moves silently towards her. as she steps out from the doorway. Michael lunges and begins strangling her. Loomis runs up the stairs as Laurie pulls off Michael's mask, exposing his face for the first time. We see his eye is damaged, likely from the wire hanger. A quick note, this is the scene where Tony Moran plays Michael, the unmasking scene. As Michael pulls the mask back on, Loomis shoots him, causing him to stumble into the bedroom. Loomis gives chase, stopping in the doorway to get a look. Michael is standing there, breathing heavily. Loomis shoots him again, and again, emptying his revolver. Michael is pushed backwards by the shots until he falls over the railing of an upstairs balcony. His body is on the ground, still. Laurie, sobbing and trying to catch her breath, asks Loomis, "Was that the boogeyman?" Loomis responds, "As a matter of fact, it was." He walks over to the balcony to see where Michael landed, but when he gets there, Michael is gone. The iconic intro music plays as the camera shifts from a sobbing Laurie to a stunned Loomis to the staircase in the Doyle house. We hear heavy breathing as the camera shifts to the living room, then to the hallway, then to the Wallace house. The breathing gets louder and heavier as the camera shifts between the outside of the Doyle house, then the Wallace house, then finally, the Myers house, before fading to black. A single word in orange letters fades in. Halloween. Halloween has officially come to an end. Alright, so we've made it through the marathon, and now we're cooling down. I mentioned earlier, the Halloween franchise has a handful of timelines, and I counted at least 5. The various timelines either add to, take away from, or rewrite the lore surrounding Michael Myers. Entire movies retcon previous movies, others attempt to explain his origins, and at least one, Halloween 3, leaves Michael Myers completely out of it. I'm planning to dedicate an entire episode to the timelines, so I won't cover them in full detail now. But here they are, just so that we can sort of get it out there. The first is simply the order of release, which is Halloween 1978, Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Halloween 4, 5, 6, Halloween H2O, Halloween Resurrection, Rob Zombie's Halloween, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, and finally Halloween Ends. The second is the John Carpenter / Curse of Thorns series, which is Halloween 1978, Halloween 2, Halloween 4, Halloween 5, and Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. A really important note, there are actually 2 versions of Halloween 6. There's the theatrical version, which most of us have likely seen, and then there's the unrated producer's cut, which is my personal favorite, that changes the movie and the lore entirely. Okay, the third is the first Laurie Strode series, which includes Halloween 1978, Halloween 2, Halloween H2O, and Halloween Resurrection. The fourth is the Rob Zombie series, which is Halloween 2007, and Halloween 2 in 2009. And finally, there's the second Laurie Strode series, which is Halloween 1978, Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends. For the record, my preferred timeline is the John Carpenter Curse of Thorns series. These series of films offer a fascinating background into the murderous origins of Michael Myers. I know the common criticism about these movies is that they humanize Michael Myers far too much. And while I agree to an extent, I also think they at least attempt to answer the questions that linger in the back of our minds. I promise I'll talk more about these timelines in an upcoming episode. Of course, whenever I mention Halloween, there are always folks who complain that it's slow or boring. So let's ask and answer the following questions. Does Halloween hold up today, nearly 47 years after its release? And what is its legacy in the horror genre? I've already mentioned the beauty of John Carpenter's use of score, lighting, and camera angles to build tension and suspense, so I won't go too much further into that. And I truly think the answers depend on the person. Because if you're someone who loves gory, violent slashers, like Terrifier, In a Violent Night, or even the Rob Zombie remakes of Halloween, I think you may be disappointed with Halloween from 1978. Because even though Michael Myers kills 5 people and 2 dogs, there's almost no blood and surprisingly little gore. So if you're comparing Halloween to other slashers, it may fall short of your expectations and desires, and that's okay. But I really think Halloween needs to be looked at apart from other films to really assess its true impact. Because, and I'll admit my bias, where it lacks in quote-unquote excitement, it more than makes up for it in dread and anxiety. And more than a few movies have tried to emulate Halloween's ability to scare the hell out of you while keeping the villain mostly at a distance. I'll give you a recent example. It Follows. In fact, John Carpenter was a major influence on director David Robert Mitchell, which is evident when you watch It Follows from 2014. A slow burn, It Follows uses a similar approach as Halloween, using camera work, lighting, and music to build an ever-increasing tension and dread. Both movies follow a main female character, who is being stalked by a vengeful killer who will stop at nothing to get them. The villains in each movie are mysterious and frankly random, and we're not exactly sure why these women are being targeted. We're not given a true backstory or mythology for either. Of course, there are major differences between the movies, but the biggest similarity is in how the killers go after their targets. Slow, methodical, impossibly patient stalking. Not moving too slowly, not moving too quickly. Just steady, focused. And both movies feature a resourceful final girl, who fights back against the monster hell-bent on destroying them. Of course, this is a well-known and well-worn horror movie trope, but Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode is inarguably the quintessential final girl, and Micah Monroe as Jay in It Follows is a worthy successor. As with any horror movie, its legacy and impact are largely subjective, and that's the beauty of horror. People love what they love, and Halloween is no different. A few days before recording this episode, I asked folks on TikTok, Threads, and Instagram to tell me why they love Halloween. And they came through. I got so many responses, I had to categorize them into technical, legacy, and nostalgia responses. Here are the technical responses. From Nick Horrorfan 88. The score as iconic as Jaws and instantly recognizable. From Opening Kill Pod. The music, it really elevates the movie and helps set it apart from others in the genre. From S.J.K. Randall. I'm a big fan of Halloween and earlier slasher films. For me, it's the music and careful pacing. It's the small town and likable characters. It's simply horrifying. From I Scream, You Scream, which by the way is a fantastic podcast. There's no blood. Such a small detail that highlights how great the storytelling actually is. From Alexis Chainsaw. The music and the fact that it's simple but effective. From Double D, K.A. I love how John Carpenter utilized a minimalist approach to horror rather than focusing on gore and special effects. He created a unique villain that was faceless, emotionless, speechless, and lacked motive. He was a land shark that could show up anywhere at any time. He would watch his victims from a distance, and although the characters didn't know he was lurking, the audience did, and it created anxieties of dread and being watched. The perfect use of synth sounds to create an iconic score were additional ingredients to the recipe for an iconic horror classic. And from Mad Love Horror, this is a nearly perfect film for me. The way Carpenter created tension with the use of lighting, camera shots, and sound design alone, with The Shape only having less than 10 minutes of screen time, is absolutely incredible. The Mask, in my opinion, is the best in horror. The use of a realistic face, but making it emotionless with nothing but darkness within the eyes makes it chilling. Lastly, keeping the original story simple, with no backstory for the unaliving of Judith or the sibling connection to Laurie, makes it all the more real. And what is more terrifying than a serial unaliver who leaves us asking, why? Guys, I agree with every bit of these comments. I love this movie for the same reasons that you do. The lighting, the score, the music, all of it just works together to create, to me, which is damn near a 10 out of 10 horror film, and one that, even 47 years later, holds up. Here are what I call the legacy responses. From Alfonso.Zavala.90038. It was an iconic horror villain, but also a later entry gave his carnage purpose and made for a creative and epic backstory. From Slash Haunts. The OG Halloween brought us probably the most iconic slasher of all in a movie that just truly feels like its name. He was creepy, ruthless, and pure evil. A mysterious force with a single purpose. The characters felt so genuine and real, which is another reason I think there's so much nostalgia for this flick. Not to mention that theme. Unmistakable, and just so fucking awesome. From the Nightclub Podcast. I love the OG Halloween for several reasons. Perhaps the most paramount being the score and atmosphere. The original idea of the shape is cosmic in a strange way. Iconic look and vibe. I also love that Loomis amuses himself by scaring kids outside the Myers house, and the fact that when Michael is hungry, he just eats the neighborhood pets. Classic. 10 out of 10. From Midnight_movie_theater. Great simple story. I love that it doesn't over-explain. The silly faces some of the characters make when they're dying. It's all good. From Blue_June_apparel. Where to start? I get a kick out of Dr. Loomis. From What an Excellent Day for a Podcast, which, by the way, is an excellent name for a podcast. Ultimately, it's simplicity. Michael is evil in human form. That's all the motivation the character needed. And watching that as a child, living 15 minutes from Haddonfield, New Jersey, made it that much more terrifying. From Tanya Contois, I'm a fan of the original Halloween because Laurie Strode paved the way for other female characters in horror movies. From Luke Greensmith, Scary Bits. You need to respect the menace it brought to the cinematic world of horror. No more isolated haunted houses, or bad things happening quote-unquote away somewhere. The evil was breaking into quiet suburban homes where people are supposed to be safe. And finally, from Mercury_Gem. Nothing creepier than a silent killer. Guys, like before, I agree 100% with your comments. Laurie Strode, even in this original movie, is just a badass. She fights back even though she's terrified, even though she's not sure what to do next, and even though she's dealing with all this trauma. She pushes back against the shape. And finally, we have what I'm calling our nostalgia responses. From Pumpkin Queen 1978. John Carpenter's Halloween wasn't the first film I'd seen as a child, but it was the first horror movie that I fell in love with. The mood and the atmosphere Carpenter created was terrifying. The score to the film completed it all. He knew how to create that tension, that suspense. It's a masterpiece. From Kevs_card_collection. This movie put the camp in campy. It was fun, creepy, and just a rush to the system. Especially for me as a 13-year-old. And nothing will ever top the classic Captain Kirk mask. From Horror Movies and Beyond. Perfect combination of scares and ambiguity. From Life with My Two Dogs. I was 6 when this movie came out, and it really made me love horror movies. The mask does really make it feel more intense, in my opinion. From BPO 435. It was when I was a kid, the way it was directed, and The Mask for me in 1978. The Mask is the best mask out of all the Halloween movies. From Vader's Fist 501. First horror movie I ever saw. Scared me out of my mind. Simply fell in love with Michael Myers. From Fire Queen 333. It was one of the first horror movies I saw when I was a kid. It started my addiction with horror. It's one of my favorite comfort movies. It's iconic. From Cassandra6979. My answer isn't quite what you're looking for, I think, but it's simply become my comfort movie over the years. And for the record, that's exactly the kind of answer I was looking for. From Auntie TT33. Favorite movie, probably because I grew up with it. My best friend's dad introduced us to movies, and this was one of the earliest, and I loved it from first view. He's gone. She's gone. But the movies keep me close to them. From _D Diana. The movie is the epitome of scary. The way Michael exists is just eerie. It's the uneasiness of how he just stands and observes Laurie. The nature of the kills. That piano sequence. From Michael Miguel 424. This was the first horror movie I ever watched. No other film has ever matched the suspense and how well the story unfolded. The relentless rage is terrifying. From The Real Deal 807. I watched it when I was a kid, and it brings good memories to me as a kid. From Spartan Hunters 2. The Mask. From Krista Gold. I suppose the fascination of a child psychopath who was never really quote-unquote fixed, if you will. From user 023014768. It is so creepy, like you know how he is there, but he makes it so creepy. And finally, from Michael Barbosa 888. It was and still is a truly beautiful piece of cinematic perfection. The minimal use of gore or blood was able to tell a story of pure simplistic terror, where good storytelling can be more effective than special effects. CGI can never compare to great storytelling or old-school special effects. The mask, the blacked-out eyes, the score, the breathing, truly terrifying. Unmatched. Period. This seems like the perfect place to end this episode. Thank you to everyone who shared their thoughts, insights, and love for an all-time classic. I'll end by telling you my own experience with Halloween. It wasn't the first horror movie I'd ever seen. That was The Exorcist when I was 9 years old. But it was the first horror movie that made me fall in love with the genre. And I remember watching it with my dad as a kid. He's no longer here. But the nostalgia is. The Halloween franchise is my favorite horror franchise of all time, even with its controversies and not so great entries. So for me, Halloween will always hold a special place in my heart. Alright everyone, that's a wrap for this episode of One Good Scare. Make sure to join me next week as we explore and dive deep into what I consider the scariest movie of all time, The Exorcist. And of course, be sure to follow, like, subscribe to the show wherever you stream podcasts, and leave a 5-star review. And remember, if you're on social media, be sure to leave comments or messages. I love responding to and interacting with all of you. It's one of my favorite parts of this whole thing. Till next time, I'm your host, Will. Thanks for hanging out.